Welcome to TRT World Forum 2021. I'm Elif Bereketli, anchor of TRT World's International Arts and Culture Program Showcase. I hope you have been enjoying the sessions so far. This year's title is Power and Paradox, Understanding Grand Strategy in the 21st Century. Now, we'll take the power and paradox discussion further with this next reflection session called Popular Culture and Dissent. The meaning of popular culture has varied greatly over time and place. Some see popular culture as simply culture that is widely favored and well-liked by many people. For some, it is whatever is left after you've identified what high culture is, or it is just a bunch of commercial productions created for mass consumption. We've seen the Arab Spring, the Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too, or more recently the Met Gala, bring into the surface questions about the transformative power of pop culture. Today, with a desire to understand the dynamics behind the socio-political power of popular culture, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel of esteemed speakers. Stephen Duncombe is Professor of Media and Culture at New York University and author and editor of 7 books on the intersection of culture and politics. He is also the co-founder and Research Director of the Center for Artistic Activism. Lucy Moyse Ferreira is lecturer in fashion media at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts, London. Her book, Danger in the Path of Chic, Violence in Fashion Between the Wars, will be published by Bloomsbury in December 2021. Charles Burchell is the founder of a sample pack label, Lex Sounds. He's a music producer, rapper, and educator who has been lecturing on hip-hop production and cultural diplomacy. A warm welcome to you all. Now, Stephen, if I can begin with you. I know that it is hard, perhaps a bit boring, and definitely unnecessary to try to define pop culture here at the moment, but I want to focus on one aspect. Pop culture, I think, still is being seen by an important amount of people as the culture of lower classes. I know you don't agree with that, but is that even a valid point of view as of 2021, or do you understand where these kind of understandings are coming from?
I understand where they're coming from. Historically, there has been a sharp division between sort of elite cultures and the people's cultures. But in the 20th century and into the 21st century, those divisions have evaporated. Essentially, we all consume pop culture. Everybody consumes pop culture. Yes, some people still attend operas, and I guess we can call that high culture. But everybody watches, for example, Turkish TV dramas. I travel around the world. You'd be surprised how many people can talk about, a magnificent century. And my hunch is both political leaders and everyday people in places like Turkey watch the same sort of television dramas just as they do in the United States. So I think that those divisions between the two are an archaic way of understanding culture.
Okay. Charles, I want to turn to you. Popular music is sort of your interest field. Do you consider pop music to be a more superficial or, say, a lesser type of artistic expression? What do you think of this kind of criticism coming from a lot of people?
Well, I think when we talk about pop music, we have to realize that pop music is a term that is really hard to define, and it doesn't actually describe anything about the music from a theoretical standpoint. So when I think about pop music, that can mean anything from Stevie Wonder to Michael Jackson to somebody like Drake or Taylor Swift. Now, those are all 4 radically different artists. So a lot of times, I believe the pop music is just reflecting what the consumers want at the time and what the record labels and the industry is putting money behind. But it doesn't necessarily mean that one has lesser value than the other. I believe Stevie Wonder's music is very, very musically rich and dense. And at one time, it was considered pop music. The same thing with Michael Jackson. And I think there's a lot of musical validity in a lot of the music that we call pop music. To me, is more of just what the consumers want and what the industry decides the consumers want that determines what's popular music.
But do you maybe sort of believe in some sort of a separation between entertainment and art and artistic expression?
I will say that there is a difference, and I believe most of what is considered pop music or pop culture falls in the entertainment category. To me, entertainment is something that is informing society about things they already are comfortable with, and just gives you more of what you're, used to. And it's really, meant for a simple escape where art challenges your perceptions of yourself, of society, and hopefully changes your perspective on things. And I believe pop culture and pop music can also cross into the line of being artistic, but I don't think that it's always the case. But the two aren't mutually exclusive. You can have very high, artistic value in music that is considered and embraced by the popular culture. So I do say that there's a difference between art and entertainment, but those lines can be blurred, and that there are a lot of artists today making popular music who I believe are making some of the most critical art that can be analyzed anywhere. So the two are different, but they're in these days a lot of those lines are blurred.
Okay, well, I'll ask you to take us through those names, but now I want to turn to Lucy. Lucy, do you believe that there is that sort of, high culture, low culture understanding? Is there that sort of an outlook for you?
No, not at all. I completely agree. This is quite an outdated way of thinking at the moment. I mean, historically, there has been much more of a stark divide between sort of so-called higher culture and low culture, but increasingly it's not valid in 2021. Those lines are completely blurred, and they're also completely unnecessary. We need to think about who is it who's sort of deeming something to be high or better, and what kind of access have they had to education, for example, what privileges are they drawing upon. And it's just not relevant anymore, especially thinking about the world of fashion, where often trends they don't originate from the top. That's a very sort of old traditional way of thinking about fashion, that the elite in society, the aristocracy, was sort of wearing something that would inspire working or lower classes to sort of copy them. But that's sort of completely obsolete now, and more often than not, trends originate on the street. They originate sort of with the people and the wider populations, and they might even go up and bubble up, as it's called in fashion theory, and go on to influence luxury fashion houses, for example.
Okay, well, it's very lovely to see all of you agree on the meaning of popular culture here. So would you also, I wonder, before we delve deeper into dissent, the idea of dissent and whether popular culture can have any political power in that sense, I want to ask you all one question. Would you all agree on the idea that you make your own meaning, when you're exposed to popular culture, basically exercising agency in more academic terms? Is that what you would agree on? Let's start with you again, Stephen.
Yes and no. That is we all make our own meaning, but those meanings are circumscribed by the cultures in which we're part. They are the things which frame out what we think is good, what we think is bad, what we think is beautiful, what we think is ugly. And then within those frameworks, we do have autonomy. But we never approach culture as a blank slate. And so we're always interpreting within interpretations that have already been made for us.
Okay. Lucy?
As individuals, of course, we all have our own very unique experiences, and we're drawing on our own memories, our own personalities. So I completely agree that there's sort of a yes and no answer to this question, because whilst we're all very individual and sort of have different meanings that we can personally take from something, at the same time, we all are part of a certain society or culture, and with our backgrounds, we should grow up with certain meanings being taught to us without possibly us even realizing. It can be subconscious. But for example, in the Western world, the color red is usually associated with danger or blood or violence, whereas in other cultures, so for example, in China, it's seen as a color of luck. So there are some differences as well as similarities there.
Okay. And Charles, you also agree with the yes and no statement, right?
Yes, and I really like what the other panelists said. So it's hard to expound, but what I will say is that I do believe that social media is also playing a large part in how people are interpreting culture, because information can spread so fast nowadays, which before, you needed traditional forms of media like television or radio for an idea to get across. But now with Twitter, with Instagram, with all these social networks, an idea, YouTube, an idea can, blossom really, really fast and spread and have an influence on a subsection of popular culture without having to engage with it through the traditional mediums. So I do think that even social media and the way things are distributed and shared through social media influences the way we interpret them, right? If you just hear a blurb about somebody's album or somebody's show and you don't actually watch the show, the blurb or the idea of something, some line taken out of context can become its own viral wave before you've ever even experienced the initial product. So I think while we do have agency, a lot of people, especially in younger generations, are more influenced by the current of how information is flowing. Where it used to be a few streams, now there are millions and millions of different streams. So I think that definitely shapes the way that we take in popular culture and some of the meanings that we associate with the things that we consume.
Okay, this is an interesting point, and it really brings me to all these debates about whether popular culture can have the power for political transformation. And the Met Gala. I mean, Lucy, I want to turn to you. All those outfits with messages about male gaze, climate change, racism, everything, every sort of political message you can think of. Do you think it was meaningful to wear them there? Because it drew a lot of criticism.
It did draw criticism, indeed. It was a very interesting theme, the most recent Met Galas, looking at America and ideas around American independence. So there was lots of scope, sort of very varied interpretations. And with that came this opportunity to sort of think about issues in American society that do need change and do need work. And it was a platform to sort of spotlight and highlight those issues. And so a lot of people have been met with some criticism. So, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who wore the sort of infamous now tax the rich dress, she was met with some criticism, saying that possibly it could be interpreted as hypocritical. But I wouldn't agree with that myself. I think she was raising awareness of something very, very significant and needed in society. And there are sort of lots of areas that need work. So not just in America, but other countries too, of course. And the designer, Aurora, sort of said that the whole thinking behind the design of that dress was all about sort of improving lifestyles, improving healthcare and childcare, and looking at climate action. So it was very successful in that respect in terms of being in this context where there are sort of wealthy people who have power in society, and it was forcing a conversation to be had. And that conversation happened at the Met Gala itself, it happened in the press since, and we're still having that conversation now. So in that respect, I think they have achieved their objectives. It's sort of really given power to these ideas, and it is forcing people to, at the very least, talk about them and raise this awareness.
Okay, Stephen, I mean, a lot of people criticize these people, saying that it is a superficial thing to do, to wear these dresses where you are actually the people who are in power, whereas you're, telling the state to tax the rich. So do you think it could possibly have an lasting effect wearing these outfits to the Met Gala, or does it matter?
Well, I mean, I agree with Lucy is that one of the things that happens is when these sort of cultural events get hijacked, if you will, and to spread a different message than perhaps the organizers of the Met Gala intended, there's no doubt that those messages then get publicized through the conduits of popular culture, and that actually can raise awareness and start conversations. But I think that it needs to go a little bit further in order for it to have impact. That is that having a celebrity say or wear or demonstrate some sort of political cause is one thing, and it's wonderful. But what impresses me about AOC and the Tax the Rich is she's also in a position of power to actually create legislation and pass legislation. And I think that link between raising awareness and creating conversations and then being able to implement those ideas and have them have real material impact is often the missing link in this sort of cultural politics. And what I like about AOC is that she's someone who can navigate both sides. She's very interested in spreading sort of an idea and generating buzz, but she's also working, every single day down in the Capitol to actually pass some real legislation. I think that linkage between culture and sort of the structure is exactly what's needed.
Then, but it begs another question. Under what circumstances is sending a political message valid? I mean, does it have to secure any tangible results to be worthy?
In the end, yes, because I think that that part of the problem of living in a culture in which popular culture is equated with consumer culture and capitalist culture is that all ideas can just become sort of products to be sold, bought and sold, and never acted upon other than as sort of a commodity to be purchased, or a personality to put on, or a style to kind of build one's own brand. And for those messages to actually have political impact, I think they do have to make that leap. Otherwise, they get turned into, as I said before, just a commodity, just a style, just a brand. And we see that happen all the time.
Okay, so before I turn to Charles, Stephen, so would you, for example, I mean, you know Baudrillard, of course, would you agree with his understanding of popular culture being able to only give the illusion of rebellion because it still is complicit in a system controlled by the powerful?
Yeah. Yes and no. I'm going to say that a lot today. um, it it is complicit within a system of illusion, but this is the system we live within. That is that there is no outside of this necessarily. I always think in terms of, well, what is the first rule of guerrilla warfare? The first rule of guerrilla warfare is to know your terrain and to act within that terrain. Well, we live in like a highly mediated terrain of signs and symbols and stories and spectacle. And if you're going to be an effective activist, you have to learn how to navigate within this terrain. But you also have to be able to link those messages to real actions, whether they're actions that are happening within a governmental body, which is what AOC is doing, or out on the streets, as the Black Lives Matters folks are doing. It doesn't really matter there, but it has to have some linkage to action. But the idea of stepping outside the spectacle is what we live within. We just have to learn how to use it.
Okay, very interesting. And Charles, would you agree with what Stephen said about linking activism or sending political messages through popular culture to real actions? For example, say, identity and Black Lives Matter. Some might say that the cause lost its value when pop music cherished it. I mean, I know it's unpopular opinion, but still, you know, a lot of people said that people were just watering down the content in order to just get, you know, a profit out of it.
Well, I think, we always have to analyze when you have a cross section of political movements and pop culture to what the real intentions are. I think sometimes political movements can be hijacked by popular culture and then lose their potency. But I also like to think back to the civil rights era, which I wasn't alive for, but my parents lived through. And there was a real unity around the musicians who were becoming popular in the Black community. So we're talking like James Brown and Marvin Gaye. We're talking, I'm speaking about the late 60s, but also on into the 70s as you actually see when all of the things that happened in the 60s as far as legislation had to be implemented in the 70s, right? So a lot of laws and a lot of things changed, desegregation, all that, but the implementation was where new problems arose. So you always had musicians organizing giant festivals to go along with, political parties, or whether it's the Black Panther movement, or whether it's, the civil rights for Martin Luther King. There was always a musical artist that was supporting them, whether it's explicitly or by organizing concerts, raising money. And in fact, there's a great movie now on Netflix that actually highlights one of these concerts. It was like a big concert in Harlem, and it was essentially around the new election in New York, but it was also to kind of bring the unity of all these Black artists who were who were popular at the time, and the political movements and the awareness of things that were happening in Harlem in the late 60s and early 70s. So I do think that the two paths can align, but without meaningful action, without the artist or the celebrity, whoever who's championing the movement being connected to someone who's actually doing the real work, there's always going to be a disconnect. So I'm always, wary of people who embrace a certain cause, but then do not have any backing in that real world to someone who's on the ground to actually push that narrative forward or do work that will actually, make an impact. So I think it has to be both. You can't just, co-sign the movement without being connected to people who are actually doing the work.
Can you give us an example? Would Kendrick Lamar, for example, be a good example in that sense?
I believe Kendrick would be a great example, mostly because the organization that he's involved with is already big in the community. They already do Christmas giveaways in which they give out food and things to the community, and they're very involved with public housing and various things like that. So just the ideals that he embraces as an artist are also reflected within the organization that he operates his music from. And I think there are a lot of artists who manage to do that successfully.
Okay, and now, of course, I really want to talk about Beyonce as well. I don't know what your opinion is on it. Actually, I want to talk to Lucy for a second. Lucy, Bell Hooks, an influential feminist, argues that celebrities cannot be symbols of progressiveness when they promote ideals of beauty. And she, of course, famously wrote this text about Beyonce's Lemonade album. Do you agree that celebrities can have feminist power in that sense?
I do absolutely agree that celebrities have the potential to have sort of feminist power, because they're showing us, as feminists today in 2021, there isn't one set way to look. I mean, it's true that there is still this sense of the male gaze that's very much alive and working, but people are understanding more about that. They're breaking it down. They're showing us other ways of being and other beauties, other types of femininity. We don't all have to prescribe to one particular look anymore, for example. So they're really highlighting that you can be empowered within yourself. And fashion, for example, you can actually use that to sort of express your individual identity. You don't have to be following something that was set for you. So it can be very much empowering in that way. So I do think that celebrities have the power to instill some of these attitudes, absolutely, and especially with the use of social media more and more.
And Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I would agree with Lucy. I mean, I think that celebrities are one of the ways that we understand the values of our culture. And so whether they're responsible or they're not, or whether we agree with them or they're not, they're one of the things that frames out, because they're so highly visible, frames out our cultural values. And we can resist them, we can disagree with them, but in some ways they set the standard. Which does mean I think that they have a responsibility to a certain extent about how they portray themselves and how they talk about politics and so on and so forth. They do have that sort of immense amount of cultural power.
So you believe that celebrities, unlike bell hooks, celebrities can be symbols of progressiveness and feminism.
Well, they can be, and they can also not be. I mean, I think that the idea that there's some sort of pure realm outside of consumer culture and outside of popular culture, which is somehow untainted, is as archaic as that notion of there being popular culture and elite culture. We just don't live in that world. And so as someone who actually, in addition to being a professor, works as an activist and trains activists around the world, I'm interested in working with what we have. And what we have is we have popular culture, which is often also commercial culture, which is tainted with ideas about profit and profitability and markets. But that is the material we have to work with. And so instead of asking the question of whether it is good or not, I always ask the question of how do we work with it? How do we use celebrity? How do we use spectacle in order to bring about social change? And also understanding the dangers of that as well, which I think is what Bell Hooks is pointing at.
Okay. Speaking of the dangers, what are the traps that we should be careful about? I mean, we as in, people receiving these political messages through pop culture, and of course, if any pop artist, any celebrity is watching us, of course, people sending these messages as well. I'm just thinking, Lucy, of Dior's "We Should All Be Feminists" t-shirt, which was sold for $700.
That's right, it was. It's about 3 years ago now, and it got a lot of attention sort of in the fashion media, but also in the wider media as well, because it was quite a statement to be standing down the catwalk. So it was a good way to sort of raise that attention for the brand. But in terms of the actual statement itself, it is very tricky to think, how can a $700 t-shirt actually be made sustainably? Who's actually made that? What were their working conditions? What's their life like, their pay like? So can we really say that we can all be feminists? And is it really a feminist message when most likely it could well have been a woman making that under not very favourable conditions at all? So I think we do have to look much more deeply and more structurally at what's going on to achieve equality, which really is the overall goal of feminism.
And Charles, I mean, we don't have much time left, so I want to take your final words about, you know, what we should be careful about and how to balance out this, you know, trap, maybe the slippery slope.
Well, I think one of my favorite artists, Kendrick Lamar, he in a recent song, he has a line where he says, "I've been ducking the overnight activist," and I think that term really resonates with me from just watching everything that happened in 2020, where of course we dealt with a pandemic, but then we also dealt with many different social movements, and seeing how many brands kind of co-opted these social movements, whether it was the Blackout Square for Black Lives Matters and for the music industry and these different things. And our brand stands in solidarity with Black people, but then there was no real action afterwards. It was just a statement, and that was that. And I think the term overnight activism can kind of really describe this idea of this trap where there are people who seem like they are, you know, about a cause, but they, you know, once you actually vet them, you see that they're not. If you go back in their history, they don't actually have a long history of supporting these causes that they may suddenly be talking about because it's hot right now. And I think people look at, you know, political causes, certain things as trends. You know, this is trending right now. Black Lives Matter is trending right now, or, you know, the LGBTQ plus community is trending right now, so I have to say something right there. Or it's Pride Month, I have to do this. Or it's Hispanic Heritage Month, I have to say this. Or it's Indigenous People Day, so I have to say this. Which, if this is true to who you are and true to your beliefs, great. But that also there should be a record of that, not just in words, but in action. And I think that's kind of the idea in the trap, this overnight activism. I suddenly align with this thing, and like Stephen said, it's just a part of your brand. To seem political, to seem edgy, it's just a style to try on without any real action behind it. And to me, that is something that I think I've seen happen in the last 10 years with social media. Everyone can be an activist on the internet, but there are few people who want to, you know, do the real actions in real life. So, you know, it has to be action based.
Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting point. Thank you so much, Charles, for bringing it up. I mean, Stephen, I want to turn to you. This is our final moments, but internet activism, or what Charles just called overnight activism, is mostly what blocks the way to, you know, real action, isn't it? I mean, this is a popular opinion, I believe, that, you know, when you just post about things that you on the surface care about, you just lose that urge to change things, actually change things, right? Would you agree on that?
Yes and no.
Okay, we have an academic with us, that's for sure.
If it stays at that level, you're
Okay.
absolutely right. If it's just a tweet about I support Black Lives Matter, yes. But however, if you're sharing an idea which then inspires someone else and then comes back to you and you start a conversation and that inspires you to actually get out in the street and do something, then social media is fantastic. I mean, social media during Arab Spring, it was used as a mobilizing tool. It wasn't used as just a way to say, I disagree with the regime, press send. It was actually a way that people organized themselves and also, very importantly, understood that other people were thinking the same things that they were outside of state media. And so in that way, it can be very important.
Okay, this is a very good example. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left, but we should definitely draw a line between, you know, real action and activism, internet activism, activism through popular culture. This is the message that we're getting today from you, our very esteemed panelists, Charles Burchell, music producer, rapper, and educator. Lucy Moyse Ferreira, lecturer in fashion media at London College of Fashion. Stephen Duncombe, professor of media and culture at New York University. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It was a true pleasure for me to discuss the socio-political transformative power of popular culture today with you. And thank you to all who have tuned into this session. I hope you enjoyed the discussion.